The story of boxing is a long one. It is a story about people. It is a story about fighting. But it is more than that. It is about how we have changed. It is about how our games have changed. Imagine a green field 200 years ago. The sun is hot. A crowd in a rough circle. They are loud. They are excited. In the middle, two men stand. No gloves, bare hands. This is where our story starts. The old way, the raw way, the beginning. This story will take you on a journey through time, from bare knuckle days to now. How fighting for sport grew up. How it became the boxing we know today. 200 years, changes, big and small. The rules, the gear, the money, the fame, a glow up. From brutal pastime to global sport, skill, speed, art, legends. We will ask some simple questions. How did this happen? Field fight to Las Vegas main event, bare fists to padded gloves, endless rounds to 12-round limit. These questions tell us more than boxing. They tell us about society, violence, sport, entertainment. The answers show us a mirror, a reflection of who we were and who we are. The story of boxing is the story of us, a human story about the fighters, men and women who step into the ring. From all walks of life, they fight for different reasons, for money, for glory, for respect, to escape a hard life. Their stories are the heart of boxing. We will meet some of them. We will see their courage. We will feel their struggle. We will understand their triumphs. Their journey connects every era, still being written with every jab, every hook, every bell. Let's go back to that field. 1824, Ward versus Cannon, Championship of England. 2 men in a ring of people, no rounds, few rules. A round ends only when a man goes down. Wrestling and throws are allowed. They fight until one cannot rise. Endurance and grit, a spectacle. Bets change hands, often illegal, yet packed. Hard truths, broken hands, blood, survival first. Hours under open sky. Now, jump to today. Bright lights, raised canvas, packed arena, gloves laced. Mouth guards in. Referee and ringside doctors enforce safety. 3-minute rounds, 1-minute rest. Angles, timing, strategy. From bloodsport to sweet science, our journey begins. The idea of two people fighting with their fists is not new. It is an old story. It goes back thousands of years. We can see it in ancient art. On vases from ancient Greece, you can see men boxing. They wore leather straps around their hands. They fought in the Olympic Games. It was a respected sport, a test of strength and skill. Even in ancient Rome, gladiators sometimes fought with their hands. This was a different kind of fight. It was often to the death. The thread of combat as entertainment runs deep in human history. It is a primal draw that has lasted through centuries, a simple contest of one person against another. But the boxing we know today has its real roots in England. Sometime in the 1600s it started to take shape. It was not a sport for kings or nobles at first. It was a way for common men to settle arguments, or a way to make a little money. Fights would happen in town squares, at country fairs, or in the back of a pub. There were no rules to speak of, no gloves, no rings, no referees. It was just a fight, a raw test of who was the tougher man. And the crowd would gather around, forming a human circle. They would cheer and they would bet. It was simple, it was brutal, and it was happening all over the country. These early fights were called pugilism. The fighters were called pugilists. The name comes from the Latin word for boxer, pugil. A village might have its local champion. He would fight champions from other villages. These were big events. This mix of local pride and the chance to win money made these early brawls incredibly popular. The sport was growing from the ground up, from the soil of English towns and fields. The first fighter to become a real star was a man named James Figg. He was active in the early 1700s. Figg was different. He saw fighting as a skill. He called himself a master of the noble science of defense. He opened an academy in London. He taught people how to fight with fists, swords, and staffs. Figg was the first recognized champion of England. He presented it as a kind of science, a craft to be learned and perfected. He was the bridge between the chaotic brawls of the past and the more organized sport that was to come. The sport needed rules. The fights were too chaotic. They were too dangerous. A man named Jack Broughton saw this clearly. Broughton was a champion fighter himself. He was the best of his time. He saw a problem after a fight in 1741. He fought a man named George Stephenson. Broughton won. Stephenson died a few days later from his injuries. This affected Broughton deeply. He did not want to see men die in the ring. For the sport to survive, it needed to be safer. So, in 1743, Jack Broughton wrote down a set of rules. They were the first real rules for boxing. You could not hit a man when he was down. This was a massive change. You could not grab a man by his hair. You could not grab a man by his breeches. The fight was to be with fists alone. He introduced a small square in the middle of the ring. If a fighter went down, he had 30 seconds to get back to that square. If he could not, he lost the fight. This was the beginning of a countout. These became the Broughton rules. They brought a bit of order to the chaos. It changed the rhythm and strategy of fighting. And Broughton is often called the father of English boxing. He did more than write rules. He also invented mufflers. Mufflers were padded gloves for sparring and practice. That let fighters train more often without serious injury. With rules and mufflers, Jack Broughton laid the foundation. He began turning a brutal blood sport into something like a science. Tough men in tough times. What was it like to be a fighter in the bare-knuckle era? It was a hard life. Most pugilists came from the working class. Butchers, blacksmiths, laborers. Fighting was a way out. More money in one afternoon than a year of labor. A shot at fame and a better life. But the price was high. Pain, risk, uncertainty. Celebrated when they won, but quickly forgotten when they lost. Training was basic and brutal. There were no modern gyms, running for miles to build stamina, chopping wood to build strength, hitting sacks of sand or grain to toughen knuckles. Sparring was done with bare fists. A fighter's hands were his most important tools. Broken hands, swollen hands, scarred knuckles. A fighter's face told the story. Cuts, broken noses, cauliflower ears. The fights themselves were grueling tests of endurance. They could last for hours. Some went over 70 or 80 rounds under a hot sun or in pouring rain. Fighters would be covered in blood, sweat, and dirt. There were no doctors at ringside. A fighter's cornermen, his seconds, patched him up between rounds. They used crude methods to stop bleeding and reduce swelling. For a lucky few, success brought rewards. A champion could become a national hero. Men like Tom Cribb, Jem Belcher, they had songs written about them. Their fights were major news. A successful champion could earn a fortune, prize money, and side bets. He might even attract a wealthy patron, a nobleman. But this fame was often short-lived. The sport was unforgiving. After a few hard fights, a boxer's body was often broken. Many ended their lives poor and in pain. It was a life of high stakes, both in and out of the ring. An era of brutal spectacle. The sport continued to grow. It became more organized. In 1838, a new set of rules was written. They were called the London Prize Ring Rules. These rules built on what Jack Broughton had started almost 100 years earlier. They became the standard for bare-knuckle boxing for the next 50 years. This was the high point of the bare-knuckle era, and the fights were still brutal, but they had a clear and accepted structure. The ring had to be a specific size, 24 feet square. It was surrounded by ropes. This was a big step. The fight was now contained in a specific space. The rules added more things you could not do. No headbutting, no gouging, no biting, no kicking. This was an attempt to make it purely a contest of punching. The rules tried to make sure the fight was won with skill and stamina, not just by breaking the rules in a desperate moment. The fighter's fists were bare. It says this meant broken hands were very common. It also meant cuts were frequent and severe. A punch from a bare fist is like being hit with a small, hard rock. Fights often became bloody messes. The goal was often to close your opponent's eyes with swelling and cuts. It was less about explosive power, it was more about relentless, grinding endurance. This era produced some of the most legendary figures of bare-knuckle boxing. William Bendigo Thompson, Tom Sayers. When the American champion John C. Heenan came to England to fight Tom Sayers in 1860, it was a massive occasion. It was seen as a battle between the old world and the new world. The fight was a long, bloody draw that captured the imagination of the public on both sides of the Atlantic. This was the peak of the London prize ring rules. The sport was popular and raw, a true spectacle of its time, but change was already on the horizon. Section 1, A Gentleman's Code, the Marquess of Queensberry Rules. The world was changing. The Victorian era was a time of great industry, but also a time of great concern for morality and social order. The brutal, bloody spectacle of bare-knuckle boxing began to look out of place. It was seen by many as a savage relic of a bygone age, too closely tied to public drunkenness, illegal gambling, and riotous crowds. The sport was often outlawed, with fights taking place in secret locations to avoid the police. For boxing to survive and become respectable, it needed a radical transformation. It needed to be cleaned up. It needed to move from the fields, back alleys, into a more controlled, more civilized setting. In 1867, a man named John Graham Chambers wrote them down. Chambers was a member of the Amateur Athletic Club in London. He created a code that was designed to emphasize boxing over wrestling and safety over pure brutality. His rules were not immediately adopted everywhere, but they laid a clear and powerful blueprint for the future of fighting. These rules became famous not because of Chambers, but because of the man who endorsed them. John Sholto Douglas, the 9th Marquess of Queensberry. They would forever be known as the Marquess of Queensberry Rules. They proposed a form of boxing that was faster, safer, and more scientific. First, and most importantly, they insisted that all fights be contested with padded gloves. This was a monumental shift. Second, they established the 3-minute round followed by a 1-minute rest period. Third, they banned all wrestling and grappling. When fighters were in a clinch, they were to be separated by the referee. And fourth, they created the 10-second count for a fighter who was knocked down. If he could not rise within 10 seconds, the fight was over. These rules were the birth certificate of modern boxing. The padded fists, gloves, change everything. The single most important change proposed by the Queensberry Rules was the mandatory use of gloves. Its primary effect was to protect the hands of the person throwing the punch. In bare-knuckle fighting, a boxer's own hands were his biggest weakness. Hitting a man's hard skull with a bare fist was a sure way to break your own knuckles. Gloves changed this dynamic completely. With his hands protected by padding, the fighter could now punch with full force more often and aim for the head without the same fear of self-injury. This led to a dramatic increase in the number of knockouts. A gloved fist, while softer than a bare one, could be thrown with so much more velocity and power that it became a more effective weapon for rendering an opponent unconscious. The entire strategy of the fight shifted. It was now about landing the perfect, powerful punch to end the fight in an instant. The puncher's chance became a real and thrilling possibility. Fights became shorter and more explosive. This made boxing a much more exciting and accessible spectacle for the general public. The introduction of gloves also had a significant effect on safety, though in complex ways. While they reduced the number of cuts and broken facial bones, some historians argue that they made the sport more dangerous in the long run because fighters could absorb more headshots without being cut. They were subjected to more concussive force over the course of a fight and a career, but there is no doubt that the padded fist was the key that unlocked the door to modern boxing. The Great Divide, Sullivan, Corbett, and the New Era. For a while, the two styles of boxing existed side by side. The sport needed a defining moment to push it fully into the modern era. That moment came in the form of two men, John L. Sullivan and gentleman Jim Corbett. The rivalry represented the clash between the old world and the new, between brute force and scientific skill. John L. Sullivan was the last great bare-knuckle champion. He was a force of nature, an Irish-American from Boston. He was a massive star, perhaps America's first sports superstar. He was strong, tough, and a ferocious puncher. He was the Boston Strong Boy, a hero to working-class immigrants. Sullivan represented the raw power and brutal simplicity of the bare-knuckle age. He was the king of the old world. Gentleman Jim Corbett was his opposite in almost every way. He was from a middle-class background in San Francisco. He was educated and well-spoken. Corbett was a new kind of fighter. He did not rely on brute force. Instead, he represented the sweet science of boxing. He was a technician, a boxer-puncher who thought his way through a fight. Corbett was the future of the sport. Perfectly suited to the new Queensberry rules. The two men finally met on September 7th, 1892 in New Orleans. The fight was for the heavyweight championship of the world, and it was held under the full Marquess of Queensberry rules with gloves. Sullivan, the old school brawler, was out of his element. He tried to corner the elusive Corbett, hoping to land one big punch, but Corbett was too fast, too smart. In the 21st round, Corbett saw his opening and knocked the great John L. Sullivan out. The torch had been passed. The bare-knuckle era was over. The age of modern glove boxing had officially begun.